This is Between Past and Future with Rajdeep Dosanjh and Ethan Quinones. Okay, so this is a follow-up to the Seattle CHAZ situation. They went ahead with their first round of defunding the police. It was a trim of a budget of about a little under 1% of the department's $400 million, but that 1% comes directly partly from Police Chief Carmen Best's salary, which was reduced by 3%, but it also involves laying off 100 officers out of Seattle's 1,400 officers. And this has caused Police Chief Best to resign. She's done with it. And Police Chief Best has been part of the SPD for 28 years, and she took on the role of police chief in August 13, 2018. She's the first black police chief in Seattle. So Black Lives Matter in relationship to CHAZ CHOP and what is going on now, the protests have resulted in the killing of, 3 people of color within CHAZ CHOP, and now the resignation of Seattle's first black police chief. So that's just the start. We're going to continue on here. And Mayor Durkin is actually really upset by this. She's not happy. There seems to be a lot of tension in Seattle between the mayor's office and the city council. Mayor Durkin had this to say: "It is unfortunate the council has refused to engage in a collaborative process to work with the mayor, Chief Best, and community members to develop a budget and policies that respond to community needs while accounting for, not just acknowledging, the significant labor and legal implications involved in transforming the Seattle Police Department." There seems to be a feeling by the mayor and Police Chief Best that the council didn't really do much to reach out to Police Chief Best in how the city of Seattle should actually go about defunding the police, what that would look like, and what would that mean. We'll get more on some of the proposals some of the ideas that Chief Best had, but before that, we'll see what other people had to say, and what the council was thinking. Attorney General Bill Barr congratulated Police Chief Best, not for her resignation, but for her handling of the CHAZ CHOP situation. He said, "In the face of mob violence, she drew the line in the sand and said enough. Her example should be an inspiration to all who respect the rule of law and cherish safety and security in their communities. This experience should be a lesson to state and local leaders about the real cost of irresponsible proposals to defend the police." And I agree with that. She did, she had to make some tough calls, but I think she made most of the right calls when it came to the CHAZ CHOP situation and the protests that had happened there and are still happening in Seattle. She got a lot of pushback for using things like pepper spray, flashbangs, something called bomb blasts. I'm not exactly sure what those were, but these are all non-lethal means of crowd control. And the protesters did not like that she used those things. Surprising. This is not the only city to go through with defunding of the police, but it is interesting that Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, there has been a lot of talk about defunding the police there, and they wanted to completely disband the police department and create a new public safety structure. But that proposal has stalled amid questions about when it might appear on the ballot, perhaps not until next year. In Oakland, there's a lot of public support for defunding the police by 50%. The city council rejected most of the proposed changes that have come across their desk so far. And Berkeley also wanted to get rid of 50% of their police. They've managed to cut 12% of the budget so far, which is more than what Seattle has achieved. And New York City has had some sort of cuts defunding of the police, but mostly what that looks like is actually just transferring money around and making new departments and such. I think one example is like parking enforcement is now no longer part of the police department, but its own department, or it might be tied to the Department of Transportation. Ethan would probably know better about that than me, but he's not with us today. And I think probably one of the most important group of voices to listen to is some of the black people from Seattle, particularly the older generation. They're not happy with this. The older generation of black Seattleites helped get Chief Best in the office in the first place, and it's mostly younger people who were upset with her. There's a real generational divide as to how to solve political issues right now, and I think it cuts across all racial lines. And there's one community organizer in Seattle, Triana Holiday, who said this is hitting the different generations a little bit differently in the black community. Among the older generation, the response is mostly unambiguous. As Best formally announced her retirement, members of the city's black clergy sat by her side. So she got the backing of the religious leaders in Seattle. And one of the community advisory council members said, "We describe it as a death. We're in a world of trouble now." And I think she's probably right, but I really hope she's wrong. And the Reverend Harriet Walden of Mothers for Police Accountability, I'm guessing she's a reverend and also the head of this community organization, says that before making demands, younger activists need to learn about what her generation already achieved with regard to police reform. They have not examined what's already there. Most of them have not read the consent decree, which is a type of federal oversight for mismanaged police cases. And she's pretty convinced that what happened to Police Best was actually racially motivated in a way. She does not think that Chief Best would have been treated the same way if she had been white. And Reverend Harriet Walden says it's anti-blackness, and I stand on that, which is pretty interesting considering that this is the result of the rabble-rousing by a protest group that rallies around the slogan of Black Lives Matter. And there's one more really important Seattle leader who we should be looking into, and that's Andre Taylor. We talked quite a bit about him, actually, in our CHAZ Chop episode. His brother, Che Taylor, was killed by the Seattle police a few years ago. And in response to that, he started an organization called Not This Time, and he actually helped pass a bill, a statewide police accountability bill, which was the first of its kind in the nation. So he actually helped produce groundbreaking legislation and actual police reform. And this is what he had to say about police chief's salary cut, the resignation, and the fallout of defunding the police in Seattle. "This here is insulting for this agitation movement to think that at the end of the day, you're going to remove or pressure a black woman, the first black chief in the history of this city, take money from her, and force her to have to make her stand on principle and say, 'I'm not going to allow you to do that.' It is unconscionable. I'm so pissed." And I think it's really interesting that, he kind of reduced this whole BLM, CHAZ, CHOP mix of whatever sort of activists he reduced it into an agitation movement, which is pretty rough, and I don't think a lot of people are going to like to hear that, but at this point, that's what it seems to be. It seems to be what they are producing. They're producing agitation, they're producing chaos, and I don't know how much actual police reform has come out of all of this. And there's a few city council members that King 5 got some interview time with. They talked to him. One is council member Andrew Lewis, and the other is council member Lisa Herbold. And Andrew Lewis had this to say: "I can see how the chief took it personally, and that's why I didn't vote for those metrics. I think it was a mistake, and that's why I didn't vote for it." And what he's talking about there is the first proposal of defunding the police, which wanted to reduce the Seattle Police Department budget by 50%, which if they had to lay off 100 officers and give pay cuts to leadership when they cut less than 1%, I can't even imagine what the department would look like after they cut 50%. And Lisa Herbold also said, I felt it was a mistake as soon as I requested from central staff the list of department heads for all the city departments, and saw that with our action it would result in her being the second lowest paid department director while also having the largest staff to manage. I think that's also referring to if they had gone with the 50% budget cut, which is interesting as to why they would single out Chief Best out of all people. I guess it's because she was in charge of the response to the protests in Seattle, but the idea that if they had gone through with the initial proposal, she would be the second lowest leadership, like police chief. That seems pretty ridiculous. And Herbold went on to say, I recognize that I've changed my position and it's come from reflection. And she's talking about the need to take money away from police departments rather than adding money to police departments. I just started to do a lot of reading and a lot of soul searching about whether or not I was only listening to one set of voices about what makes safe communities. And it's true. I mean, the addition and the growth of police department budgets has long been a third rail of politics, and I had accepted it unquestionably. Councilmember Lewis added, I certainly did. Last year, I campaigned on expanding the police force, but we were presented with new information. 56% of the calls to the police are responding to are non-criminal. What that suggests to me is not that we need more police, it's that we need more first responders, which is why I'm advocating for the creation of a new system of low acuity first response. And I guess what he's getting at here is that if there's an emergency like a car accident, that police officers go to the scene of the accident. And I guess maybe he's arguing that maybe officers don't need to go there, which I don't think I agree with. You probably want an officer there to put down a police report, even though it's not criminal. Or he's talking about cases where people call the police and nothing criminal has happened, but how do you know whether or not something criminal has happened until an officer shows up to investigate it? I really don't understand what he's talking about there. Maybe there's other sorts of things like cats being stuck in trees, but as far as I understand it, that's always been the fire department's job. And I think we got one more person to talk about before we get to Chief Best's actual comments, and that is from our favorite council member, Kshama Sawant. I don't know if you guys remember, but Kshama Sawant is the communist on the council in Seattle. She's a Trotskyite and proud of it. She led the protesters to Mayor Durkin's house. She opened up the city hall during coronavirus. Remember, pandemic still going on. And she led in hundreds of people into City Hall where they had a little rap session about how they can improve the city by defunding the police and how CHAZ is a really great thing. She's an unabashed supporter of CHAZ, an unabashed supporter of BLM, and I would imagine an unabashed supporter of Antifa, but I'm not sure if she would say that out loud. She probably would. I'll look into it. But Kshama Sawant had a few things to say about this budget, about police chief's resignation, and about why she didn't vote for this proposal of defunding. She was the only council member to vote against it, saying this budget fails to address the systemic racism of policing. A budget that does not meet basic social needs and that continues to throw money at a racist, violent institution is a failed budget. So I guess for Councilmember Sawant, the very idea of a police department is racist. I guess it is true that it is a violent institution, right? They are public officers who are entrusted to perpetrate violence on behalf of the state. which you might not like, but that's usually, that's how things work. Violence is still a solution to some problems. Although, as we know, for the police, it's not supposed to be their first recourse. Kashama also had this to say about her colleagues not moving faster to slash more of the budget. It represents a total abdication of responsibility, an abdication of responsibility in the context of this historic movement for Black lives. Councilmember Sawant is not happy about any of this. She doesn't understand why they didn't just dismantle the whole police department right away, or at least cut it by 50%. Before we close up, I want to talk about what Chief Best actually had to say about all of this, her decision for why she resigned, and some of the proposals she had come up with, some of the ideas she had floating around her head of how to actually improve policing in Seattle. And the first thing that she wants to, that she said, is that this is not about the money, and it certainly isn't about the demonstrators. I have a lot thicker skin than that. It really is about the overarching lack of respect for the officers, targeting my command staff and their pay. It felt very vindictive and very punitive, and I don't want them to be affected by that type of animus. So Chief Best is just really upset about the treatment of how cops are being portrayed in Seattle by the council, by the protesters, I guess. Her colleagues, the people who she works and coordinates with, they're getting a lot of hate for being cops, and that can't feel good, especially to a 28-year veteran of the force. Best also had some suggestions and all that, and like Mayor Durkin said at the beginning, the council did not really invite her into any of the conversations about how to improve policing, and I think that the person you would want to have in the room when you're trying to improve policing is the police chief of the entire city. But what do I know? It's clear to me that we need more community engagement and involvement on real-time issues. I suggested that we bring a community member on a rotating basis, or what have you, onto the command staff so they can be engaged in those conversations. They can have a real-world view and a real-time view of the work that is going on in the police department, and also provide us a real-time view with what we might be missing in the community. More community engagement. Wonderful. Having a citizen member who helps make decisions for the police, help give them perspective. This seems like a reasonable proposal. Bess also said she's not actually opposed to changing certain things about the department. I think we can all recognize that there are areas we can improve, and we might be able to funnel some of the work that officers have been doing into other areas. Many times we're responding to issues because there are gaps in other systems. The mental health system is insufficient. The healthcare recovery system is insufficient. So those calls to 911 officers are often responding to them. What really concerns me is I just have not seen the plan. We have 800,000 calls for service every year. If you lop off even 100 officers, that's going to be highly detrimental to a department that wasn't staffed enough to deal with the calls we did have. And who is going to answer? I'm going to tell you, at 3 a.m., when somebody is standing in the street in some kind of crisis mode, armed or unarmed, somebody is going to need to respond to address it. Right now, they haven't hired any staff. They don't have a plan to hire staff. And what is their training going to be? They are concerned about racism, systemic racism, yet they are creating another system, and simply being a mental health provider or social worker doesn't mean you're not going to have racial issues. But Police Chief Best, you don't understand. According to Councilmember Sawant, mental health and social work aren't racist institutions in and of themselves like policing are, so you got to get out of here. Police Chief Best goes on to say, I think it's much more complex than just taking out some money and moving money elsewhere. It's a question of what are the functions, what do you want to see done, and how do you want them to be done. I think there is a much more deeper conversation. I keep calling it a revisioning of how we do things. Who is the better party and what is the better response? I think it's going to take a lot of thoughtful conversations, and they need to be community-led. It just can't be one or two groups in an echo chamber with these discussions. If the community wants change, they should get change, but it needs to be thoughtful so it works for everybody. I think that's wonderful, but the way that this worked out is there was an issue of possible police brutality in Minneapolis. I say possible because a jury hasn't made an official verdict, right? This still needs to go to trial. And something happened in Minneapolis, and because of what happened in Minneapolis, now the community in Seattle has to change. This is a movement that is imposing sort of top-down solutions across the nation, even though local concerns and various communities have different issues. And the idea that you can use cookie-cutter solutions, I think, is a non-starter. And that's part of what Chief Best is getting at here with the need for deep conversations in communities. She goes on, I don't think any of us are on a different page. I think we all want public safety. None of us want to see black men killed at the hands of injustice, whether by police or their neighbors or anyone else. None of us want to see crime override the city. We all want our children to be able to walk to school safely without being victimized, or predators coming after them, or shootings in their schools. We all want that. So let's talk about who is the best entity, where is the best training, and how we can make it happen. I think that would be an important first step to open up the communication. I believe if we do it, we will have the best city in the country. I really do. So she's still got a certain level of optimism and hope, which is, it is inspiring. One last thing to wrap up about why she, and really what the straw that broke the camel's back for Chief Best was that she received an email from a new black recruit who had just joined the Seattle Police Department. And he expressed to her how excited he was to join the department headed by her, the first black woman to lead the city's police force. And under this new form, this new budget, this cut that they're doing, Police Chief Best would be responsible for firing 100 officers. And the way things work in police departments, most of the time, this is the case in Seattle, is, you got issues of seniority and all that. Police unions are really strong. There's really strict rules about how you fire people. And so that means that the 100 officers who are going to get fired are probably the 100 newest officers. That guy who sent Police Chief Best the email talking about how excited he was to work under her, she's going to have to fire him. She's going to have to tell him you're laid off. The city doesn't want your help. The city doesn't think it needs you. The city thinks you're bad. And the 100 newest officers, Police Chief Best, the local black community up in Seattle, that have been doing all this work to diversify the what the police makeup, the department makeup. They had a lot of new diversity hires recently. So who do you think is going to be fired? The 50-year-old white guy on the police department? The 50-year-old white man who's been working at the department for 25, 30 years? No, it's going to be the young 20-year-old, 22-year-old. And most likely, if they've been making diversity hires recently, it's going to be black, it's going to be Latino, it's going to be Asian. Probably some white people too. Not going to deny that. But it's just a real shame. And police chief said, Miss Best said, that's it for me. I'm done. I can't do it. That was what really broke her heart about the whole situation. So she's going to have to fire young men who looked up to her as an inspiration because of the changing face of law enforcement in Seattle and say, no, we don't want that kind of change. We just want to get rid of you. So that's the update in Seattle. Hopefully things get better over there. I have a feeling it's going to get a whole lot worse, especially if Councilmember Sawant has anything to say about it. And yeah, we should be back next week with a more regular episode. And Ethan will be back too. Okay, great. Signing off. Hey, and listen to the closing song. It's great.
Who's to say more than our eyes for to see within the heart of one the sun we saw before? The moon is just a goon, yet soon the curtain falls. The savior in ourselves will crumble all the walls. I know it seems a bit like we came from outer space, but Betty knows I waited for the alien, okay? Chalk it up to destiny, the rest of me is you, like a pretty little rabbit chilling on the moon. I won't break the arcade game before the flash that makes the black heart taste the lash. I won't disclose the future except for what I know. Tell the radio and television to tell the show. I saw the alien, okay. I saw the peace sign, November break day. I saw the alien, okay. Shining in the sky, November break day. The dead endeavor, the happiest rabbit ever, within the cosmic blessing of love and energy. Drums to space, you know this is the place. Our heart and soul has saved the human race. Could it be that we truly know the score? 'Cause my alien friends say we ended the war. A bloody battle, an interstellar fight. Somehow we did it, victory of the light. But I won't break the arcade game before the flash that makes the black heart taste the lash. I won't disclose the future except for what I know. Till the radio and television do tell the show. I saw the alien, okay. I saw the peace sign, November break of day. I saw the alien, okay. Shining in the sky, November break of day. The peace sign, November break of day. I saw the alien, okay. Shining in the